This is Guitar Business Radio, the podcast for the business of guitar. No reviews, no demos, no idle chatter, just useful dialogue and information to help you get the most out of your guitar-related business. Whether you're a guitar builder or a guitar player or just something in between, this is for you. Now, here's your host. Oh, wait, it's me, Jeffrey D. Brown. So let's get to it. Wow, time is flying by. We're at episode 5 already. And on top of that, it's daylight saving time again. Hard to believe because it seemed like I was just complaining about it getting dark early, and all of a sudden, we're going in the other way. But that's a good direction. And speaking of good directions, I'm thrilled with the way this show has taken off. Much better than I expected. But I have to be honest, I don't play the expectation game much, which, by the way, is one of the things I'll be talking about in the value shot at the end of the show today. And that reminds me, coincidentally, we are now producing the value shot segments as excerpts of the full shows, and we're putting them out in a unique video format. These are short segments of around 4 to 6 minutes where I share some useful ideas and methodologies combined with some perspective and a bit of inspiration, all to help you stay on the path to a successful guitar-related business or career. Now, you can listen to these videos on our website in a brand new section called What Else? Videos. You can also get them and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Just search for Guitar Business Radio. I'm telling you, the fun never stops here. So, we're committed to making Guitar Business Radio not only interesting and entertaining, but useful and valuable. But to make it the best it can be, we need to spend the time and make the effort it takes to do that well. And frankly, that takes resources. Now, we could wait until the time is arbitrarily right to move forward on this, but we've decided that even at this relatively early stage in the life cycle of the show, there's probably no reason to wait. So we're going to be inviting you to become a show supporter, if you so choose, at any level you're comfortable with, which may be 0 for some or many. We get that. But as a supporter or a contributor at any level, you'll be appreciated and recognized both on the show in our upcoming Supporting Roles segment and in a special section of our website by the same name. Plus, there are some other benefits which you can read about. Now, we've decided we're not going to sell traditional ads on this show, but we are a business program. We are capitalists. Profit is good, but we believe that doing it this way is best for this show. And there's no hard sell, but if you like what we're doing, we hope you'll add your support in whatever way you can, and we'll do the very best we can to support your interests with thoughtful content, innovative opportunities, and more to help advance the cause of good business in the business of guitar. So if you're interested in helping us move the show forward for our listeners and participants, please visit our website at guitarbusinessradio.com and click on Supporting Roles to get all of the details. Now, once again, it's time for this. Now it's time for Questionable Moments, the segment where we bring up relevant questions of interest to our listeners, bat them around a bit, and see just what kind of answers we can come up with. So in episode 4, we brought up the following question: where do custom guitar builders go from here? And again, we got a variety of different responses. From Facebook, David said, they should keep doing what they're doing. Seems like boutique builders are getting more looks these days. Well, that may be possible, David. Maybe we should commission a survey, or maybe somebody already has. If, in fact, any of you have some data on this, let us know. Dennis thinks that it's pretty simple. If you're good at what you do, people come to you. So I think in theory, Dennis, that's probably right, but you're also going to have to be good at getting the word out effectively so that people actually know they can come to you. And we spend some time talking about that and other useful stuff in our segments at the end of the show called The Value Shot. And from our website, in our new Questionable Moments section, where you'll find all the episodes in one place, so check it out, Chris is telling us that small builders are uniquely positioned to respond positively to production pressures. I build only with responsibly grown woods, and my customers appreciate that. I can also build one-off guitars profitably without having to retool a huge facility. Well, Chris, it sounds like it's working for you, and really that's what matters. Artie chimes in With so much saturation in the market, I imagine there's a lot of downward pressure on prices, even for custom builders. The top builders will probably continue to get their price, but others will have to adapt, and I think many are. Well, there's likely a lot of truth in what you're saying, Artie, but if you have a different opinion, let us know. And speaking of different opinions, we're talking today with guitar builder Cory Batson of Batson Guitars. After more than a decade of building terrific and expensive custom guitars, he decided to make the big shift. And he's going to tell us more about that in great detail in just a moment, so stick around for that. Now, our next question of the week is, what's in the pipeline for guitar accessories? This is a really big question. We think it should generate some interesting responses. It's really wide open, and you can add your thoughts on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com and just click on questions, or we'll post them on our Facebook or Twitter page at Guitar Business. Now, for something completely different. Well, Cory Batson started building custom guitars about 20 years ago for his company, appropriately named Batson Guitars. Based about an hour outside of Nashville, he's developed a reputation for building thoughtful and innovative guitars for the high-end market, often selling in the $8,000 to $10,000 range. But a few years ago, his mission changed, and ironically, it had a lot to do with the original reason he got into building guitars in the first place. And Cory Batson joins us today to talk all about it. So, Cory, thanks for coming on the show with us today.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Well, it's good. We've known each other a while, and I'm really happy to have you on the show. So let's get started, because I know we got a lot to talk about. So I know that you started building guitars roughly about 20 years or so ago, and I think you told me that it took about 10 years to build up a foundation that would hold the business that you're running today. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why you got into the business and what those roughly first 10 years looked like.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I got into the business because my first guitar was stolen from me.
Oh, boy.
And I wanted one, and I wanted a good one. And I went and played a, $5,000 Loudon guitar, and I couldn't afford that. I had a lot of woodworking and furniture making background. So I just thought, well, I'll go buy a book for $25 and build one. And it was infectious. I loved it. All the woodworking side of it, plus the more fine detailed technical side of the instrument side of it. Both of those things really got me going. Now, the first guitar I made wasn't that great, so I immediately started making another one. And since I didn't work for another guitar maker or study under anyone, I was just completely self-taught. I did a ton of research into why different makers do things the way they do them. And the theories and reasons of physics were all over the place. So I just kind of scrapped all of that and went to physics of acoustics and thought, well, I'm just going to start all over. And that was truly just the way my mind works. The research and development side of it for me is the most fun of any project.
But that first, you were still first looking to build a guitar for yourself. Did you have thoughts about being in the business of building guitars at that early stage or not?
No, not at all. Not at all. For years, I didn't. I was just doing it because I loved it. I always had another job. So it was just a hobby, and it was fun. And every guitar I made for years was different than the one that I had made before it.
And better?
Just in trying new things. Not always. It's trial and error. And, that word error is in there for a purpose, for sure.
Well, that's just all R&D, as we say, right?
Right.
The errors are all
absolutely.
R&D. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
So, so you went on doing that for some time, and did anything change? Were there any evolutionary points? We're still kind of talking about those first 10 years or so. Was there anything significant during that time span that kind of changed it for you in any way?
As far as design is concerned?
Well, no, just as far as your direction in the business. We're talking
on
about
the business side.
Yeah, because at some point you decided to get into the business, but I'm trying to kind of lead up to that and see, if there were any specific developments that, influenced you along the way in one way or another.
There were. My dad was always an entrepreneur and self-employed, and I liked that aspect of it, and I have a lot of that drive that I learned from him. And I guess throughout those first 7 to 10 years where I was still in R&D mode, I did sell a few guitars here and there, to friends of friends and whatnot that wanted me to build them something, and little things like that. So that kind of created a little spark and wonderment of, well, maybe I can make some money.
Now, what kind of feedback did you get from those friends and friends of friends that you sold guitars to? Anything positive? Was it helpful in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was very good, very good. And early on, I'd actually reached out to George Loudon, just, telling him that I was a huge fan and, if he had any advice for me starting out. And actually what he said he's a Christian man, and he said, don't let anybody tell you how to build a guitar. He said, just pray that God will reveal something to you. He made the trees and he made the physics, and which was really interesting, because now I know that there are a few things that he does that no one else does.
You're talking about George Loudon, right?
Yes. Yeah. And he has a very unique voice in his guitars,
Sure.
And that's really what I was looking for. I was looking for a different voice of a guitar, a voice that suited my style of play, which is more of a finger style player, not the typical banging bluegrass Martin sound,
Sure.
And all of these different brands that are out there, they kind of have their own voice.
Well, at what point, Cory, did you feel like you started to get your own voice in your guitars? I mean, was that something you felt early on, or was there a point along the way that said, okay, now I sense that there's something unique about what I'm doing?
Well, it was about 9 years into my building and all of these other trials and errors leading up to the concept and design that I use now. And I wanted to see that what I had in my head based on my R&D, I was pretty sure would work. At that point, I designed 4 different body shapes because I wanted to see how this one design would work on different body shapes,
Got it.
So I built 4 guitars, all the same, except for the last one. And the only thing I did different with the 4th one was the bridge. And originally on those first 3, it basically looks the way they do now with the tailpiece, cantilevered fretboard. But the strings just went straight up and over the saddle, like on a violin or a cello or archtop or whatever. And I loved the sound of it. Really good sound, but it lacked a little drive and a little punch. So I developed a bridge that the strings would run through and then up and over the saddle. And that is what I settled on. I have changed bracing patterns and things like that since then to the point that what I'm using now. But for the most part, that was about 9 years ago when I stumbled. I don't want to say stumbled on it, but just, through my research and development, came up with the design that I currently use.
I got it. So, well, let me then kind of go on to what was going to be my second question, which is at the point where, your business kicked in and you started to develop a little bit of stability and you were selling some guitars regularly. And you've talked a little bit about some of these things that differentiated, but how would you describe at that point, as you started to really get into the thick of the business, what are the things that differentiated your instruments from others, and what kinds of things were working for you, in the business and in that area?
On the business side, really what kind of kicked it off, honestly, was I'd taken out a few ads in Acoustic Guitar Magazine, and that's that's really when I started getting some recognition. I think from the first ad I took out, I actually had the acoustic music company in Brighton, England, the guy that owned that store, contact me and wanted to be a dealer. And he sells high-end acoustic instruments. So, and I had a few other dealers that had contacted me along that regard. Plus, on the other side, I was getting a lot of consumer feedback and orders. And the interesting thing was that I'd say 75 to 80% of these guys early on that were buying my guitars, which is strange to me. I just would never order an acoustic guitar online without having played it, and honestly, something that looks so drastically different. But when these guys would call me and contact me, like I said, about 80% of them were engineers. So all of the concepts, the things that I was using and explaining why they look different, it's not just to look different. There's actually laws of physics behind it. It made sense to them, So that was a really interesting recognition,
That's a really, I don't think that I've quite heard that before from, any of the guys and many guys that I've known in this business. So that's pretty fascinating. So you seem to have gotten some early result from advertising. And was there anything else that you were doing to try to generate business in those next few years at all that was work? I mean, we had the internet up and running, and where was and you talked about dealers. So did you have any dealer activity at all? Was that something that you pursued at that time, or?
I didn't really pursue it. I had 2 or 3 dealers here in the U.S. and one in England, and all of those guys came to me. They approached me.
Got it.
And that kind of went along with my own logic and philosophy of, I don't want to have to sell somebody on something and convince them that they want it or need it. If they recognize that themselves and contact me, they're going to do a much better job of selling it than if they were sold on it by me. Does that make any sense?
Sure. Sales is a thing unto its own. I guess I've always kind of described myself as being a hybrid guy because I guess I got the creative gene from my mom, but my dad was a great sales guy. So thankfully, I've got both of those things, and that's how I've, been, if I was just a creative guy, which is kind of what's in my heart, I'm not sure that I would have been terribly successful at it. I mean, I might have been, but the fact that I knew how to sell, and I spent a good deal of my career really on the revenue side as a magazine publisher and those kinds of things. So, and plus for me, I'm not totally happy when I'm doing just one or the other, and I have done that. So having the mix, but there's just some people that sales is best left to somebody else, and we can talk a little bit about that.
And that is me for sure. That's the other side of it also. I'm better at talking somebody out of something than I am convincing them that they need something.
You don't want to try to do that unless it's something you believe in. Right.
Yes. Yeah. So now I have had people tell me that when it comes to my guitars, I'm good at selling them, but I'm not selling. I'm just talking what I know.
Sure. And that's a form of selling.
And some, right. But as far as just a cold call, walk in and, try to sell somebody something, nobody's going to buy anything from me.
Well, so you pursued along there, and it seems that I got to know you in the early part of this second 10 years, been 8 or 9 years or so now, and I knew you really as a custom builder, and that's what you were primarily doing. And I'm going to talk just in a little bit about that aspect in a little different way. But I want to shift now into what, for me, I think is really the meat and potatoes of this interview, what I wanted to talk about. And that is that what I've been thinking of in your case is this big shift, as I've said and as I've told you. And of course, I'm talking about the move to create your new high-end, I would say, for me, imported line of guitars. that's taken quite some time to come to fruition, but there's been a lot to it. And I think this would be really of interest to our listeners in understanding how you made that decision, how you got started, and then we'll get into a little bit of the weeds of it.
Okay. That was really born from, I guess, two different avenues, as far as having my design that's more affordable than a custom guitar. At the time, my custom guitars averaged $8,000 to $10,000. This was about eight years ago, and I was constantly getting emails from people saying, "Man, I love what you're doing. Very cool. I wish I could afford one."
And that was in the upper
really
end,
started,
I would think. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really started resonating with me, looking back on why I got started was because I was in love with a guitar that I couldn't afford. So that side of me was stirred to the point of thinking, let's try to do this on more of a manufactured level and get some of our guitars out there that are more affordable. I tried that here in my shop. My brother started working with me. He's phenomenal with marketing and sales and all of that kind of stuff, just unreal. And I hired two other guys that I'd gotten to know just to be apprentices and help with the production side of it, all the while still doing my custom stuff too. So we came up with what we called the number 5. And those guitars still sold for about $3,000, which is still way too much, And anyway, and even at that, there wasn't enough margin in it that we could have them in dealers. So, which that's the other side. People that are going to spend $10,000 on a guitar, they usually own 10 or 15 of these $10,000 guitars.
Yeah, that's the truth.
And then the guy that's out there that is in the $1,500 to $2,000 range, he's been saving up for a long time, and he's got one shot.
That's
to
a
get
great
it right,
observation. Really.
So they really need to be in dealers, so these guys can put their hands on it and figure out if it's right for them. Great. If it's not, great. Spend your money wisely, on whatever suits you. So that was difficult with that as well. So the price point was too high, and the margin wasn't there so that they could be in dealers for people to try. So we built and sold about 60 of them really quickly. And in that process and thinking through what I was just describing to you, I realized this isn't going to be sustainable. It's just not going to work. So I quit all of that, and I started thinking about that. Actually, I didn't do anything with a lower end guitar for, I don't know, probably 9 or 10 months or so, but it was still in my head, just something that I wanted to do. So, and I was introduced to a mutual friend, to a guy here in Nashville that had connections in China. He actually had just moved here from China not too long ago, not so much in the guitar business, but very well connected business-wise. So I actually made 2 trips to China with him, looked through a couple different factories. Well, I say a couple. We went to 7 or 8 different guitar factories, which is a drop in the bucket as far as guitar factories that are over there. I know there was one province that we went to, just this one province, that there were over 300 guitar factories in that province.
Isn't that amazing?
Of China.
Just amazing.
Yes, crazy. So I did have a few samples made. They were pretty inconsistent. And one thing that I was continually learning at that time about Chinese market is you really have to know who your manufacturer is, like down deep and dirty, know who they are. Because a lot of times samples will be amazing, but when they do a production run, they cut every corner they possibly can. And then you're stuck with a bunch of stuff that you just got to throw in the dumpster.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah. So I was introduced by another mutual friend to Mike Marcoeur and Rick Hall, who I believe Mike started working for Ovation in 1976. And then the last 15 years of his employment before he retired was as Takamini's product manager. So I started picking his brain. He was familiar with me and my guitars and whatnot, and he recommended a Korean factory. So I built the guitar, sent it to them. They reverse engineered it, built one, sent it back to me. And that's kind of how this current business process started.
So a quick question. When you said you built a guitar and sent it to them, so they could see an example of the kind of quality that you're looking for, and again, the construction and all your own innovation. Did you send any accompanying documentation or
Yes.
supporting material?
Yes.
I would assume that you would. And how extensive was that?
I had very detailed CAD drawings, bracing, neck profiles, obviously all the logo work, the bridge design, tailpiece design, all of those details. So they had actual electronic files as well as printed on paper, like blueprint type stuff, I guess you'd say. So they had all of that as well. And one of the things that Mike mentioned when he recommended this factory was the bevel, the armrest. And I thought he was crazy. I thought that can't be produced in a factory. I mean, the only way to do that is by hand, and it's fairly difficult. And at the time, there were no manufactured guitars that had that on them. There are now. Alvarez does a bevel on some of their guitars now. But anyway, that seemed crazy to me. But I did. And even in the guitar that I built specifically to send to them, I made 7 or 8 videos of me creating that bevel and putting it all together so they could actually see it being done, because it's something you can't explain. So those are the things that they had from me to help them create a sample to send back to me.
And so the first, yeah, go on. This is the first thing so when you got something back from them, how did that go? What was your experience with that?
It was very good for all of the main points that I was looking for. Now, there were a few things, action, some of the fret dress stuff, a few little things like that. The angle of the tailpiece wasn't quite right. As far as the gap under that tailpiece between the tailpiece and the soundboard tapered. It didn't stay a consistent gap as far as following the radius of the soundboard. A few little things like that weren't quite right. And I did have some issues in the first order that I placed. The first order I placed was for 40 guitars, and the placement of the saddle in the bridge was too close to the front side of that bridge. The other thing about this is that my guitars are so different. They have taken some time because they're not, like the factories in China that I've been in. They build traditional guitars and they know them inside and out, and they have all the fixtures and jigs and tooling to crank them out unbelievably fast. You could just go in there and say, build me this guitar, make the headstock this shape, and put my name on it. But with my guitars, there's new tooling involved. There are a lot of other things that make it more difficult for the factory. So I did completely understand that going in, knowing that this isn't going to be a really quick thing to nail down every detail right away. But like I was saying, in that first order, the saddle placement, saddle slot in the bridge was a bit close to the front, and the holes in the back of the bridge were too low in the bridge, so that brake angle was way too steep, put a lot of forward pressure on the saddle, and I had several bridges that broke.
Oh, dear.
The saddle would break out of the front side of the bridge. So there were several things like that, that in the end, if it happened after someone had already bought it, I'd replace it, and the factory's been phenomenal in working with me as far as warranty stuff is concerned,
now,
which has been really good.
Those that first order of 40, did you sell all or most of those?
Yes.
And what was, and that's been a few years now, right? Or a couple of years, or how long has it been since that first group came out? I mean, I've known you through this. We talked about it initially.
Yeah, about 2 years.
Okay, that sounds about right. Sure.
Yeah.
And any feedback from your customers on just that first group? Any issues that you had to deal with, and what did you learn from it?
There were some other issues with that first group, like the bracing I use is a lattice brace, so the braces cross each other and they're lap jointed, and the bracing was squared off. It wasn't triangulated like I wanted it to be. And some of the braces, that lap joint, some of them stuck up higher at that joint than the brace that crossed through it. Just little things like that, somewhat messy glue on the inside, which is in almost all guitars, but you can't see it.
Right.
But in my guitars, because of where the sound hole is, you can see everything on the inside of the guitar.
It's like a viewport to the inside.
Yes. So it needs to be clean,
Right.
All of those little things needed to be addressed. And even when I would talk to people who were buying these, I would explain those things to them, and I would sell them at discounts when it was feasible to do so, because they were somewhat inconsistent throughout that. Not every guitar was exactly like that. So depending on what those issues were, I'd discount it or whatever. But the feedback has been excellent, really, really good.
Well, it's really it's an extraordinary looking guitar. It is so different, and so I'm sort of thinking now from that first group of 40 to where you are today. Were there several iterations that you went through in order to get to the place that you're at now? You said 40 at first. Were there more groups down the road that also needed to be refined, or has that been a smoothing process as you've been going?
Yes, it's gotten less and less. And I'll say the last group that I got was excellent. And the last changes that I made weren't huge. They were just my preferences. And those were the bone that they were using for the saddle and the nut was a softer cow bone that would be perfectly suited for a nylon string guitar, but will wear out over time with the steel string guitar. So I had to source, they weren't able to source any camel bone. So I've had to source that and send that to the factory so that they could use the bone that I want. And I guess the only other thing that went along with that was just in back and forth with their factory manager, getting him to overcome his fear of sending these guitars out with the action specs that I wanted. From a factory standpoint, if they set the action higher, then it won't buzz ever.
Yeah, sure.
And from my standpoint is if the fretboard is leveled properly, frets are dressed properly, you can set the action low, and with the correct relief in the truss rod, then it won't buzz. So we had some back and forth with that as far as even the action at the first fret, as far as how deep their standard for the other brands of guitars they make, they have standards, and that's what they were using on mine. But my standards are different than the other brands that they make.
And they're high standards, and I think that shows in the instruments, especially the ones that I saw at NAMM this year. And I told you, what I thought about it at the time. But that kind of brings us to the point where now you have a line of guitars. I know that you've brought some other people on to really expand the marketing and distribution and whatnot for the instruments. So you're really into a different realm now, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. And blessed to, if they're custom guitar makers listening, they'll know how close you get to guys that are ordering custom guitars from you, because it's a process and you get to know these guys. And I have several close friends now that I would have never had. Our first conversation was them calling me, asking if I could build them a guitar, And one of those guys has actually become my partner on the business side of these imported guitars. He's a guitar nut, retired, very successful businessman, which again, like the sales and business side of stuff, that's not who I am, Anyway, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, that he was actually asking me to build him another custom guitar. And I was telling him kind of my vision and importing guitars and this and that, and wasn't asking for his help, but he recognized that I needed it,
Sure.
So he kind of asked, and said, I'd love to help you out with this, get this thing going. So that's been that's been phenomenal. There's no way I could do this on my own.
Well, the work that you've been doing and on the marketing side and really kind of, I'm telling you, I see it as a pretty big shift. And I think that this should be really interesting to not only to other folks in the business, but I think to players as well, having a deeper understanding of what you're doing and what builders have to go through. So I'm really glad to have brought this information to the show. So we're kind of running toward the end here, and I really want to ask you just a couple of real quick questions, and that's regarding the questionable moments from our last episode 4. We ask, where do custom guitar builders go from here? And I know that that's from where you've come, and that I'm wondering now, in your own case, are you still going to build custom guitars? Do you see that as a viable business going forward, or what? Are you going to, most of your focus is going to be on this other line?
Yes, most of my focus has been on the imported guitar side. And that's been taking a lot of my time, just from the business side of it, to dealing with dealer side of it, dealing with independent sales reps, and, all of that kind of stuff. And plus, every guitar that comes in, I personally go over every one of them before they go out.
So you've got your hands full, basically is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes, I do. And I do, well, for me, I'll say this, like I was saying earlier, what really got my juices going with building guitars is the R&D side of it. And honestly, the last 10 years or so has been not as exciting, because I've been doing the same thing now, Sure. Even though it's different, it's old to me. And I have a lot of other weird, stupid, crazy ideas rolling around in my head that I simply haven't had the time to do.
But those are the kinds of things that some of those are going to turn out to be big. Not all of them, for sure. Probably most of them will not, but there's going to be a few in there that will. And, we just have to wait and see what comes next from Cory Batson. But that's going to kind of do it for us today, Cory. Again, really a thrill to have you on the show and to learn all of this good stuff. And I hope that you'll come back again and we can talk and see what has developed and changed between now and then sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, man, I really appreciate it, Jeff. And again, it's been great knowing you as long as we have, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, and so it is. It's mutual. So stay busy. We'll talk again soon, Cory. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. All right.
So this is the value shot segment of the show. It's always at the same place in the show, at the end. But now, through modern science, we can clearly demonstrate that some things can truly be in more than one place at the same time. As I mentioned near the beginning of the show, the value shot segments can now be seen and listened to in a unique video format that you can get on our website in the video section, or directly from our YouTube channel where you can subscribe. Just search for Guitar Business Radio. Now, in the first 4 episodes, I talked a lot about the 3 C's. That's our simple checkbox formula for working with anything related to marketing and sales. We're going to get more into the detail of that down the road a bit, and we'll also have some, as I said, handout material, as we used to call it, and that will be available for download around that time. But today, I'm going to go in a little different direction. Although I have to tell you, this is still foundational stuff, so I'm only going to lay some of the groundwork for this. And by the way, even though I say I'm going in a different direction, keep in mind, all of this is related. It's all designed to work together in a relationship of sorts, like I described in the last value shot in episode 4. So I want to get into something that I've always referred to as the expectation game. And again, this phrase is not original to me, but how I use it and put it together maybe. And in the lead up to this episode, I promoted the segment with the title, The Perils of the Expectation Game. Now, most of what I talk about comes from many years of doing and learning over and over again. Lots of trial and error. Sometimes it felt like a lot of error, and often that turned into something we could definitely brand as failure. Most of us have had those. If you think you haven't, you may be delusional, but at the very least, you've missed out. I say that because I learned maybe 10 or 15 years ago that it was time to remove the word failure from my vocabulary. And again, I credit a great friend and teacher for this incredible piece of wisdom. But at that point, it became clear to me that everything I thought was a failure was in actuality research and development. That's right, R&D. Think about it. Now, in the real world of R&D, there's always a ton of things that don't work out. But if we're doing it right, we're learning something from everything that goes wrong. And over time, the sum totals of what we learn turn into knowledge and expertise. And remember, in a previous episode, I said that knowledge and expertise are gained in a manner that is gradual, sequential, and cumulative. And this too from the same source. So try looking backwards at the things you may have seen as failures and start relabeling them as R&D. Then recognize all that you've learned from that and what knowledge and expertise you've gained as a result. This can be a very uplifting and positive exercise. Let me know what you think. Now on to the expectation game. And again, this is not complicated at the foundational level, but let's think about all the expectations most of us have. I've just arbitrarily divided them into two kinds, primary expectations and secondary expectations. Again, I don't know that this is original to me, but it's a simple process that makes things a lot easier. I think it makes sense when we have operational expectations, like the airplane will fly properly, the toaster will toast, the smartphone will be smart and work as it should, as long as you pay the bill and have a signal. You get the picture. Those are my primary expectations, and for sure, there are lots of them. My secondary expectations are not really expectations at all, but really it's just one giant generic expectation that you might look at as operating in the expectancy of the best possible result. And I try to apply this principle to anything that has a variable outcome. And for sure, there are lots of those in both our business and professional activities, as well as our personal lives. Now, when I speak about keeping your eye on the destination and keeping all your options open for how you're going to get there, for me, that means I'm operating on the idea that in most situations, there are always multiple pathways that will get you where you want to go. Or, very important, someplace better. When we create a very narrow expectation of how something should happen, we all too often set ourselves up for, at best, a disappointment. At worst, a failure. Sound familiar? When we let go of these kinds of secondary expectations and adopt a view that is more like this or something better, especially when something along the path doesn't seem to be working, we're then, in my opinion, far less likely to be derailed on our journey. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to talk more about how all this can affect your business or professional career, both negatively as well as positively. In the meantime, as always, thanks for listening, stay positive, and be aware of the perils of the expectation game. And I'll see you on episode 6. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.